Welcome to Saturday Lunchtime with CMJ. I'm Jane Moxon and I'm the Head of Development for CMJ UK. It's my privilege to do introducing Kelvin Crombie today. I'm excited to do so because he's an old friend of ours who's done many tours, many meetings with me for CMJ. I hope you've got your sandwich and coffee and are sitting comfortably. Did you see in the video that we just saw about the history of CMJ, it talked about Romans 1 and verse 16. In Romans 1 and verse 16, which is one of my slides, it says, "For I'm not ashamed of the gospel. It's the power of God for salvation to everybody who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek." And when Missionary Society started, nobody was taking that good news to the people from whom we had got it. And that's where CMJ came in. Now, Kelvin Crombie has worked in Israel for 26 years. And 20 of those years, he worked with CMJ in Israel. And while he was there, he set up heritage centers in all our places and also wrote our history. And the history book that he wrote was called Over 200 Years of CMJ, Reaching the Jewish People. And this book is available in our office and it's easy to get. It's an absolute essential book if you want to know about CMJ and its history. It's rich with all the information that Kelvin has got about everything that happened right across the world when we had over 250 workers with CMJ. So Kelvin's written not only this book, but lots of others. Another book he's written is about covenant. And that book is called Israel, Jesus and Covenant. And it's really saying, listen up, God has not broken his covenant with the Jewish people. It's still there. And guess what? The church has not replaced Israel in God's heart. How could it? So in a moment, we are going to hear from Kelvin. Kelvin's latest research has taken him across Europe in search of Jewish followers of Jesus who perished in that Holocaust, and it's led to surprising results. He visited many countries, many camps and museums, and he searched through the original records and interviewed families. His extensive research has produced volumes of information, and to date he's written 2 books. He's got a 3rd on the way that I know, and I'm sure there are many more to come because his research isn't finished. The virus that we've all suffered has put a pause to his work, but he will resume it and he'll continue to do the rest of his research and produce more information. It's essential for us. And it's also an emotionally challenging project for Kelvin. And I think it must certainly have taken its wear and tear on him. But the talks are a must for all people who are willing to realize or consider that the Jewish believers in Jesus are still Jewish. And Jesus is fully Jewish. So I would like to welcome you, Kelvin, now. It's my privilege to have you. And as I said, you and I have toured lots of meetings, haven't we? We've been many years, we've been touring Britain and also France. And so it's my privilege and pleasure to welcome you to this talk today on the Family Jocz. Thank you, Kelvin.
Thank you, Jane. It's nice to be with you all, wherever you are. I presume spread throughout the United Kingdom, maybe some others elsewhere. I'm here in the hills outside Perth, and I suppose when you're living in Britain, all you hear about Perth is lots of sunshine and lots of sand and a lot of sea. Well, it's also winter. We're in the middle of a very cold and wet winter right now. I've got a fire next to me. I'm rugged up a little bit, and it's still a bit cold. So your understanding of Perth just changed. But nevertheless, when COVID's over, still come down here for a holiday. Last year, like everybody else, we were closed up. We couldn't go anywhere. Our government in Western Australia doesn't like us to go to the other part of Australia, actually. So we were, very much confined to home in Western Australia last year. And so throughout that time, I put together this book on the Family Jocz, particularly Basili and Anna Jocz. Some of you might have heard of Jacob Jocz, J-O-C-Z. I hope I got the pronunciation right. Who was a long-time worker for CMJ and a great theologian. So many people who are involved in Jewish work today within the church are familiar with the name of Jacob Jocz because of some of the fundamental and profound works and books that he wrote after the Second World War. So this book that's just been done relates to primarily to his parents, but in a sense to 3 generations of the Jocz family who were followers of Jesus. But before I talk a little bit about the content of the publication, perhaps a little bit of information, first of all, about what started it all up, what got us there. And for this, I owe a great amount of gratitude to David Pelleggi from Christchurch, Jerusalem. And I'm sure everybody knows about David Pelleggi. If you don't, then we'll get up to speed and get to know about him. But David's had this burden for quite a few years to document what happened to the Jewish followers of Jesus during the Holocaust. And for a number of years, when I used to go to Jerusalem from Australia, my eldest daughter would take a tour across every year. We came back to live in Australia in 2009. Thereafter, she began to do the tours. But David would always talk about this and drop a hint. Well, I didn't realize he was dropping a hint so much, but he was dropping these little hints. And then after the 2017 event at the Royal Albert Hall, which I was very privileged to be involved, after that event, I just sensed the Lord just saying to me, well, that's it, Kelvin. You've done your bit with Balfour and Beersheba and all that sort of stuff. The 100th anniversary events of 2017. And I thought, okay, that's nice, Lord, but, what next? I'm a sort of a character. The way I'm wired is I like to have a project and a couple of good meaty projects at the same time, if you don't mind. Well, the Lord then gave a very, very meaty project because soon afterwards, David Pelleggi just said, well, wake up, Crombie. I've been giving you a few hints for the last couple of years. I would like you to do this research project. And when he said it at the beginning of 2018, I just sensed, yeah, it's right. It's the right project to do. I don't like to use the word project, actually, or research study, whatever you want to call it. And I just had a sense that, yes, it needs to be done. And whatever I can do to help David with this project or this research study, then I'll do my best. Now, there are others who've been working on the subject matter. I don't want anybody to presume that we're the only ones that are doing this, by no means. Mitch Glaser, who's the head of Chosen People Ministry, has done some work on this over many years. Richard Harvey from Jews for Jesus in the UK, Geshem Nerel from Yadesh Manah in Israel. They've been working on this in different ways also. And I'm sure there are many, many others besides David and myself. So I guess we're just part of a larger number of people who see that it's important to document to the best of our ability what happened to those Jewish followers of Jesus during the Holocaust. And so the project began in, I think it was about February, March, something like that, 2018. And I just happened to have a few publications on my own library here. Started to go through them, and then you get into the internet. And of course, one thing leads to another. And I was in like fling, you might say. But there's only a certain amount you can do from a little tiny library that I have and from the internet. So midway through 2018, I went across to Israel. I think it was for the GAFCON conference, if I'm not mistaken. Or was it the year after? Can't remember. Whatever. And so began to do some research at the Schick Library and the Yad Vashem, and had a few interviews, and information slowly began to come in. The only problem was, I'm going to take these glasses off, as if I can actually manage without it. It's too much glare there. The only problem is that there's so much information coming in, you have to sort of try to work out, what do you put all this information? So I was beginning to be overloaded with information, and I had to start working out a few mechanisms. And as I began to get more and more involved in the research, then I said, yeah, there definitely needs to be a couple of mechanisms here. Otherwise, I'm just not going to be able to put all this together, collate it. So in the middle of 2018, I went to Poland on a tour with David, one of his Eastern Europe Holocaust-related tours, and that was extremely good. I'd been to Poland before. I've been to Auschwitz before, been to Treblinka before, but many of the other places I had not been to the forests, for instance, where lots of Jewish people were shot and buried in the forests. And all those things were essential in order to get a hold of the bigger picture, because in order to study this aspect of what happened to the Jewish followers of Jesus, it is quite essential to, first of all, understand the dynamics of the Nazi period, 1933 to 1945, and then to understand the dynamics to the best of our ability, the Holocaust itself. So there were sort of three aspects. It was, you might say, the period, the overall period, then the Holocaust, and then what happened to the Jewish followers of Jesus. So with information that was gleaned from that trip, and I did some other work besides that, came back here and began to put it together. And then in 2019, I went back to Europe again, and did two tours there in 2019. One of those was, again, a Holocaust trip. And in 2018, got to get my dates right here, end of 2018, then I did a very, very intense research tour to the UK and Canada and the United States. That's right, the end of 2018. And that was to go to the archives of English-speaking missionary societies, CMJ being one, of course, but there were many from the UK and from the US. There were no actual missionary societies that I could find anyway from Canada itself, but Jacob Jocz, the son of Basili and Anna Jocz, the one who worked with CMJ for many years, he went to Canada. I believe it was 1956, I think, at the top of my head, and went off to work with the Nathanael Institute and then later worked with Wycliffe College. Now, it's some time in the past, I'd met Jacob Jotz's son, Philip, the grandson of Anna and Basili Jocz, and he was then living in Montreal, not Montreal, where was he living? Help me out here, Toronto. And so I made contact with him. And so after going to the UK and before getting to the US, I dropped into Toronto for a few days and met up with Philip Jocz, plus also went to the archives of Jacob Jocz at the Wycliffe College Library. Now, it was the meeting with Philip Jocz, which was very, very important in putting this whole book together, material together. He mentioned to me not long before I got there, he said, listen, my sister and I were just found some more material, which we didn't even know existed. Don't ask me how, but anyhow, that's the way it happened. So I rocked up there. We spent a half a day together in his sister's home. We went through all the material he had. He brought out lots of stuff. Some I knew, much I did not know. And I was busy taking photographs and taking some notes and asking some questions. And it was just absolutely a brilliant time together with Philip Jocz. And at one stage I said to him, you've got to put something onto the website about this. And so they've got a website there now on their family. But at one stage he brought out a file, and I should have actually sent a slide over about the file. It was a thick file, and he said something like, this is the file. It's all in German. I don't know what to do with it. I have even thought about throwing it away. Well, as a researcher, when people say that, something just goes, woo, this is important. And so I started to open up the file and go through it. Now, the majority of it is in German. My wife, Lexi, speaks German. Lexi has some German relatives, but none of that's brushed off onto me. So my German is pretty bland. When I was hitchhiking around in my old days, I know how to say "Ein Bier bitte," and that's about it. But nevertheless, knew enough German words. When I was going through this material, I thought, hang on, I recognize that word. I can see the context, but there were dates. Lots of dates. And one date in particular, 28th and 29th of February, 1944, I could see time after time after time. And it became pretty clear this was actually the day that Basili Jocz was arrested by the Gestapo, and the day after was shot in the local prison. And so with that material, I began to realize, well, here is actually an incredible source. It's a primary source. Now, what happened is that Basili Jocz was indeed arrested. His wife, Anna, she either had a massive stroke or she was beaten by the Gestapo. There were two different accounts there, so probably a combination of both. And she was paralyzed completely for a while, then after 3 months on the waist down. And I won't go into all the details of what happened then, but just to say in brief that she survived quite miraculously. and so did one of her sons that was there at the time, Pavel or Paul, and with his wife Elizabeth, they managed to get out of that region. When the Soviets took over, they managed to get out, and in quite a miraculous way, Anna not only got out of the Soviet Union into Germany, then to Belgium, but she actually managed to get into England. They got her a British passport, and they were giving out, it was very scarce, very difficult to get a passport after the war for someone of her nature. She got a passport, got into Britain, and Jacob was in Britain. What I've neglected to say is that when the war began, Jacob Jocz was actually in Britain at the time the war began. He couldn't get back to Warsaw. He was the pastor of the Hebrew Christian congregation in Warsaw, a very large congregation of about 120 adults. But he was out of Warsaw when the war began, so he remained there. His wife was a British lady. And so Anna managed to get there. Even though she was partly paralyzed, she'd survived all this long trip. And so Jacob now took care of her. And she went with Jacob and Joan when they went off to Canada. And when he was there, he realized, well, listen, I should try to get some compensation from my mother because she was beaten up by German soldiers, Gestapo, but nevertheless from Germany. So there was then the opportunity of getting compensation. So Jacob made an application, but of course the German authorities aren't just going to take any application and run with it. They needed to check it out. So they actually must have hired a researcher, or they had a lawyer involved. And so therefore they had to do some research to validate if what Jacob was saying about his mother, what his mother had told him, was actually true. So a lot of that file, very thick file of papers, was legal material from the lawyer in Germany and his lawyer in Canada, his letters and affidavits, and a whole range of materials, and also Anna's own testimonies and so on and so forth. So it was an incredible source material. So you had a lot of information, and these things probably don't come that often, actually, where you've got a German researcher going in and actually finding details. I mean, when Anna was beaten up, for instance, there was a German postman, civil servant, you might say, in the house in Lvov, which is now Lviv in Ukraine, boarding there at the time. There'd been German soldiers previously. And they actually tracked him down. They went and found this man, and he was actually able to also validate that information that she gave was correct. So I photographed a lot of these pages, and then later when I came back to Australia, I gave them to Deborah Pelegi, who was originally from Germany, and Deborah wonderfully translated them into English for me. So that was the outcome, the main outcome of that research trip. Of course, in the United States, I also did a lot more research in the United States. There was one very, very important CMJ-related Hebrew Christian Jewish believer in the Netherlands called John Rottenberg, and also in quite a miraculous way, Esme Laurie helped me with this. We tracked down his son. His son was surviving and living in San Diego. Well, I actually had to do some research down in San Diego, and so I met up with their son, John Rottenberg's son. John Rottenberg actually been involved with the work of CMJ in the Netherlands. He was arrested in early 1942, and he actually was worked to death in Mauthausen concentration camp in Austria. And so it was great to be able to meet the son, who's since passed on, but also gained quite a bit of material as well. And God willing, that will go into the publication we're going to do soon on what happened to the Jewish followers of Jesus in the Netherlands. Anyhow, so that was the outcome of that very, very intense 5-week research trip. I think it did 17 archives in those 3 countries, a lot of material to bring back, and had to start processing it. Then in 2019, there was a long 10-week research trip, and I think I did 7 or 8 countries on that occasion. And the catalyst was an invitation from CMJ France, Jane, and Alex, and the others who are involved in CMJ to come and do some speaking on behalf of CMJ in France. And so that was great. I was very open to do that, but it came with a stipulation. I said, okay, if I go to France, I want to go and check out what happened to the Jewish followers of Jesus in France. In particular, I want to go to a place called Gurs, which is right down at the base of the Pyrenees, where they actually sent Jewish people there and they were supposed to be then transported to the island of Madagascar. And so Jane and Chris checked it out on the map and thought, gee, that's a long way to go. Is it really worth it? Well, it really was worth it, and we're going to talk about that in a couple of days' time. So that was just one of the aspects of that 10-week trip. Now, that 10-week research trip was so intense, I actually on several occasions had to go from one country to another in order to make sure I get to an archive that's going to be closed on this particular day, and then I had to go back again. That's how intense it was. And I remember on several occasions I thought, this is crazy. What am I doing this for? It's the 21st century. Shouldn't have to be running myself ragged. Well, of course, I didn't know then that 2020 was going to be off limits altogether. So, but the Lord knew that. So I was able to collect a huge amount of material. And then in 2020, of course, as we all know, COVID hit. And so there was a lot of time thereafter to begin to collate this material. Now, as I said before, a huge amount of material. I think on the last one of those trips, I had something like 25,000 pages or something I'd photographed, some incredible number of stuff. I still haven't gone through it all. So that's what I do. When I go to an archive or a museum or a camp or anywhere, I basically just photograph every single thing I can find, because ultimately there may be something important in one of those places, even if it's in a camp and you're just taking photographs of seemingly insignificant things. They could actually ultimately be significant. And so then as I began to put this material together, I said, Lord, help me to get some sort of a system here so I can actually understand where to put all the stuff. So two things basically came to light, which helped me tremendously. Now, these are two systems that I've developed. So I'm not saying that the historians would adopt these, but this is what helped me. First of all, to understand who it is that's classified as a Jewish follower of Jesus. We'd call them Hebrew Christians then, or Jewish Christians. Today they're called Messianic Jews. Now, the official Nazi classification was non-Aryan Christians, because with the Nazi worldview, there were Aryans and there were non-Aryans. Okay, so the Germans and all those from Northern Europe were Aryans, okay, and all the rest were non-Aryans. Of course, at the bottom of the list were the Jewish people, as well as the Gypsies and the Sinti and the people like that. So, classified as non-Aryan Christians, but as I was reading through materials, oftentimes you'd see the word non-Aryan Christian, for instance, or you see the word convert, or meshumad, which was a derogatory term used by Jewish people, or meches, similar from in Poland, concerning a Jewish person who they would see as being an apostate, okay, a convert. And often it was a derogatory way that was written. But this would be used for a whole range of different people. So I worked out that there must have been at least 7 categories of non-Aryan Christians, okay, or Jewish Christians, Jewish people who were involved in the church. So, for instance, there would have been those who genuinely believed, before the 1st of September 1939, those who genuinely believed that Jesus was the Jewish Messiah. And there was a large number, a very, very large number of these. Exactly how many, we don't know. We may never know. But there was a large number. In Warsaw, for instance, the CMJ congregation there was probably 120 adults. And they would have been genuine Jewish followers of Jesus. So that's one category. Another category are those who, I would say, converted for socio-economic reasons. And we know this was a factor for Jewish people in Central Europe, Western Europe, who wanted to actually be integrated into German society or Dutch society or Polish society or Austrian society. And they couldn't do it if they were Jewish. But if they were members of the host church, the Lutheran Church, the Reformed Church, or the Roman Catholic Church, then, and they'd be assimilated, then they could more easily do it. And so there's no guarantee that these people actually had a genuine faith, even though on many occasions they would have had to go through a catechism in order to be accepted into the church. Now, some of those people, when they're doing the catechism, may have suddenly thought, yes, this makes sense. Yes, I genuinely now believe that Jesus is the Messiah. But I'd say probably the vast majority were not like that. They just wanted to be accepted and would assimilate into the host society. So that's the second category. A third category would be those who married, those who were Jewish and had a Gentile spouse or Christian spouse and wanted to marry that spouse. And so they would have converted to whichever faith system was most prominent, Lutheranism or Roman Catholicism or Reformed in the Netherlands. And they would have then been able to marry in the church, and they would have thereafter have been Christians, Jewish Christians. So that's a third category. Now, a fourth category would be the children and the grandchildren of those first three groups, or categories, groups. Probably sounds better. The children or the grandchildren of those first three groups. Now, those children or grandchildren might not even have known that their parents or grandparents were actually Jewish because they might have assimilated so much. And there are accounts of people during the period of the Holocaust itself of Jewish people being arrested because they were Jewish, or people being arrested because they were Jewish, and they didn't know. They honestly did not know that they were Jewish, but of course the records stated that their grandparents were, or their parents were. So from that category, you might have had a lot of people who were genuinely involved in the church, who were genuine followers of Jesus, but they might not have known they actually had Jewish ancestry. Now, a fourth category would have been those who, after the 1st of September, converted, became part of the church in order to survive. And I've no doubt at all that a lot of people did that. There are some instances when baptismal certificates were given in order to save Jewish people physically. Now, in some of those instances, they would have had to go through some form of a catechism if it was possible. But sometimes it might not have been so possible. Who knows what would have happened, what did happen with some of those people when they were doing the catechism. They might have actually had a genuine conversion experience. Again, we don't know conclusively. A sixth group relates to children. Oftentimes, Jewish parents would realize that the only way of survival for their child would be to put them into a convent or a monastery. And then in order for them to actually be safe there, they would have had to have been baptized or been accepted as Christians and so on. And this was a bit of a difficult category at the end of the war, after the war. Some of those children might not have wanted to go back to the Jewish community. In some instances, the people who had adopted them, the institution, or even parents might not have wanted to send them back. And you can understand those dynamics. So it was not actually an easy category or grouping to deal with after the war. And the last category would be those who actually had a genuine conversion experience, conversion being not from Judaism to Christianity, but spiritual conversion, of believing that Jesus was the true Messiah of Israel. And so would have had a genuine experience during the war itself. I mean, Ludwig Hirschfeld, for instance, who was an assimilated Jewish person, was a professor in Poland. He himself probably had a spiritual experience when he was in the ghetto, because he probably came into the Roman Catholic Church in order to further his career in Poland. But he himself wrote that he never felt closer to the church than during the period of when he was incarcerated in the ghetto. And that there were younger people and other people also coming to faith in Jesus during that period of time. They had nothing to gain. They were never going to get out, okay, because it had nothing to do with your faith. It all had to do with your bloodline, so they were never going to get out. But people were actually having a genuine experience of the Lord in the ghetto. So they are the seven categories or groupings that I have seen. And that's not conclusive. No doubt there were others, and it's not the same. It's not strict categories or groupings either. There could be, a bit of overlap between them, but it helped me to sort of somehow relate to the mammoth amount of information that was coming my way. The second thing that I began to put together was a time frame itself for what happened during the period 1933 to 1945. How did we get to the Wannsee Conference in 1942, which actually then stated, we're going to murder 11 million Jewish people. Not just in Europe, but surrounding areas as well, including the Middle East, including in the land of Israel. How did they get to the point of saying we're going to murder 11 million people? So there had to be some sort of a progression. Because I was reading material and I thought, okay, I read it, but it doesn't seem to indicate that the Nazis at this stage were going to murder all Jewish people. So there had to be sort of different stages along the way. Now, again, this is my own system. I'm not saying the big historians, the main historians would agree with this, but it helped me to find where to put all these different pieces of information. So the first group I started off with was pre-1933. You see, when the Nazis came to power on the 30th of January 1933, they didn't come out into the balcony the next day and say, incidentally, we don't like Jewish people, we're going to start hassling them. All that stuff was there previously. It was part of the Nazi worldview. Hitler put it into Mein Kampf. It's there, basically. But he himself had to draw upon other streams within German society, within European society. So there were a lot of different things that made up that Nazi worldview. You can say that social Darwinism was a part of it. You can also say that anti-Semitism within the church was also a great part of it. And the philosophies of the time, that just a nihilistic worldview that there's nothing in this God thing. It's a whole range of different streams, basically, that made up the Nazi worldview. And of course, the Nazis weren't focused just upon eradicating Jewish people from the life of German society. They also had other things in mind, getting rid of the communists, okay, and Bolshevism and Lebensraum, having more space to develop German society in the East. So there were other aspects of the German worldview, but this one, this hatred of the Jewish people, was very, very much part of it. So then you get to 1933, that's the worldview, but they couldn't do much with it, apart from, hassling Jewish people up until 1933. But then once they came into power, they could then begin to implement that worldview relating to the Jewish people straight away. And that is exactly what happened, especially in April when they began to have boycotts against the Jewish people. There was the civil service law, for want of a better word, but it's basically saying that Jewish people could no longer be part of the German civil service. And slowly, they began to strip things away from the Jewish people. And of course, then you get the Nuremberg laws of 1935, which effectively just took away citizenship. So the whole idea there was intimidation, exploitation, and immigration. They wanted to intimidate the Jewish people, to exploit them in any way they could, and then encourage them to get out of the Reich, get out of Germany. And as then the Germans went into the Sudetenland, or Austria first, then the Sudetenland, and then the rest of the Czechoslovakia, and the Reich grew, then that policy of intimidation, exploitation, and immigration continued into those regions as well. So that's what I would call stage 2, or phase 2. And it was okay initially. Those Jewish people, or a lot of them who had the means, could get out if they really thought it was viable. A lot didn't. They thought, it's a passing phase. But lots could see the writing on the wall and did get out. But ultimately, the doors began to close. And of course, many countries of the world didn't want Jewish people to come as well. And Australia was one example. There was a conference held in 1938 at Evian, and the Australian representative there said, rough quotation, "We have no racism in Australia. We don't want to import a racist problem." Okay. Well, part of the reason being, of course, is that Aboriginal people were not classified as human beings. So in a sense, you could say, yeah, he's right. There was no racist problem because the Aboriginals aren't actually people. They're actually flora and fauna. Anyhow, we won't get into that one. So anyhow, those are the sorts of things that were happening in that period of time. Now, that phase virtually came to an end on the 1st of September 1939 when the war began, because now it was more difficult for Jewish people to be able to get out of the country when the war happened. But the Germans now actually had a further problem of within the Jewish context, because they now inherited another 2.5 million or so Jewish people. Don't forget that when Poland was invaded, of course, the Germans and the Soviets already had a plan called the Molotov-Ribbentrop non-aggression agreement, let's say, whereby it was going to be divided. So Poland was going to be divided into three. The western part of Poland would be annexed to the Reich, to Germany. The eastern part, which would be including the city of Lvov, okay, where Bosley and Arne Jocz were, as well as Paul and Elizabeth, that would become part of the Soviet bloc. Now, in between, a large area was going to be called the Government General. So it would be under German administration. Wouldn't be directly part of the Reich part of Germany, wouldn't be part of the Soviet sphere, just a big area. Now, a huge number of Jewish people lived in that area. Oh, there's a map. Very good. And so what happened at that stage is the Jewish people that were in the area to be annexed would be moved over into the general government. All the Jewish people in the area annexed by the USSR were so-called safe, you might say, at this period of time. But the Jewish people in the area to be annexed by Germany were moved into the general government. And so that's when you had some of the cities really beginning to get larger. For instance, there were a large Jewish population already in Warsaw. Well, that number swelled now because a lot of Jewish refugees were forced out of the area that was being annexed, and they had to be accommodated in the area of the general government. A lot also went to the city of Łódź, L-O-D-Z, which was in a sense part of the area to be annexed, but and that's where the first ghetto was established. So when they were to be taken into the area of the general government, and you're talking about a lot of Jewish people now, the plan at this stage was we're going to make a particular area of the general government just for the Jewish people. All the Jewish people would be moved to an area around the city of Lublin. And they had a couple of different names for it. One was called Judea, for instance. It's going to be a Jewish area, a huge Jewish ghetto, about the size of Yorkshire, I think was what I saw written in one Jewish missionary intelligence at one stage. And so you got a couple of million Jewish people were going to be put into this area. But before that could happen, they would be put into different ghettos. So the whole concept of ghettoization and this large area, the Lublin plan, were working hand in hand. So that was the plan at that stage, of what to do with the Jewish people. Now, a lot of Jewish people were killed during this process in the ghetto through starvation and also through some executions and small local pogroms, but not on a mass scale. So that was phase 3. In time, it was seen that this actually wasn't going to work so well because a lot of logistics involved. Because what happened, they were taking Poles out of the area to be annexed to Germany. And part of the Molotov-Ribbentrop agreement was that a lot of Germans who were living in areas of the Soviet Union would be transferred over. So it was an exchange of populations. So there was a lot of trains having to be used for soldiers and all these other things, and they couldn't work out all the logistics. Now then, stage 4 or phase 4 began in 1940 at the time when the Germans invaded, especially the lowlands. Okay, Denmark and Norway were in April, were invaded in April, but in May the 10th, the Netherlands, Belgium, and France were attacked. Because now there's 550,000 or so Jewish people living in those 3 regions. And the Netherlands surrendered, I think, on the 15th. And it's only because the Germans bombed the center of Rotterdam, a cowardly thing to do. And what chance did the Dutch have against the German Air Force? So they surrendered. The Belgians lasted a bit longer because at the time when the Germans invaded, that's when the BEF, the British forces, and the French were able to come into Belgium. They couldn't do it beforehand. But in the meantime, of course, the Germans had a large army that went through the Ardennes and cut in behind, went through to the English Channel and cut in behind the Allied forces, the British and the French and the Belgians, and cut them off. And that's the whole Dunkirk story, as you all know so well, much better than myself. And so then, of course, Belgium fell, and then in time, by June, France surrendered as well. Now you have 550,000, about 550,000 more Jewish people coming under the German control. So at this particular point in time, the foreign ministry realized, well, there was this 550,000 Jewish people. We have to do something with it. Then, of course, you had the various Nazi and Gestapo authorities as well, and they have been given that responsibility in Poland to deal with the Jewish people. And at that particular point, a suggestion was made. It wasn't the first time the suggestion had been made, but now it's put into the context of the peace agreement, whereby the Jewish people, particularly initially from Western Europe, but ultimately from all those conquered areas, would be moved to the island of Madagascar. Now, Madagascar was a French colony, so they couldn't do anything until the French had been defeated. So once the French had been defeated, then two guys who worked with the SS, Adolf Eichmann and a guy called Thomas Dannecker, or Dannecker anyway, then were instructed to work on a plan, a very, very concise plan of how to get ultimately 4 million Jewish people that were then under the German control, how to get them from Europe to the island of Madagascar. They couldn't implement it, even though they had defeated France. They couldn't fully implement it. Why? Because the British had not yet surrendered or made a peace agreement with the Germans. So the Royal Navy still controlled the seas. So they couldn't do it entirely until the Brits were basically neutralized in a sense. But nevertheless, they began to work on this plan. And I've seen the plan called a Madagascar plan that Eichmann and Dannecker put together. It's pretty detailed. You write down to the minute details how they're going to actually organize things in Madagascar itself, as well as how they're going to get them out. 1 million a year were going to be transported. Now, in that context, that's when they began to bring Jewish people from the western part of Germany all the way down through France to the southern part, to Gurs, another place closer to the Mediterranean coast, to these camps that were way down there. They weren't built especially for Jewish people. They were already there. But Gurs was expanded tremendously, because I kept on scratching my head. What in Dickens' name are they bringing all these Jewish people down there for? And then I read later, those very same Jewish people, those who survived, were put into trains and sent back to Paris and then to Auschwitz. Why were they taking them down there and back up again? Well, that's because of this Madagascar plan. And ultimately it didn't succeed because Britain was defeated or neutralized. And so that plan, it was there. If Britain had surrendered, they might have then begun to implement it. So then we get into 1941, and it was pretty clear by this stage that it was going to be harder to defeat Britain. And then Hitler had his idea of then invading the Soviet Union. And so that's when they went into the Soviet Union. I'm probably spending too much time on all this. Sorry about that. I'll get to the Jocz family in a minute, because they fit in. This is the context in which they fit into. And so anyhow, the next plan was then going into the Soviet Union, which is called Operation Barbarossa, which is in June of 1941. And the plan there was to begin to systematically murder Soviet officers and commissars. Commissars were sort of like officers, but they represented the Bolshevik regime into the army, let's say. And because of Hitler's ideology that Bolshevism and the Jews were synonymous, therefore, if we want to get rid of Bolshevism, we get rid of Jewish males in the first instance. And so that was the order that was given. You just go out and you can shoot Jewish men between a certain age. But after a while, that began to morph into phase 6 by about August of 1941, because by now you had the Einsatzgruppen, which were the murder squads, then actually beginning to shoot Jewish women and children, not just the men of that particular age group that fitted into this Bolshevik idea, but now they're beginning to systematically shoot Jewish men, women, and children. In the September, Babi Yar, for instance, near Kiev, I think there was about 30 or so thousand were murdered over a couple of days, shot. And so obviously now something new was happening, and that's when you began to see the implementation of the final solution. Yes, by September, October 1941, already it was beginning, they began to see that the ideal solution would be to actually murder the Jewish people in the Soviet Union. What they would do then is they would transport all those other Jewish people that were in Western Europe over into those captured areas of the Soviet Union, and they would stay there until such time as the war was over, and then they would move them out of Europe. So Europe would be Judenrein, Jew-free, and they'd move them into Asia. Okay, that was the plan initially, but of course that began to slowly be overtaken by the concept, well, if we can shoot the Jewish people that are in the Soviet Union, why can't we do the same with everybody else? But then at that stage, Himmler began to have second thoughts about shooting people, and so it was decided then other more humane ways of killing Jewish people, murdering Jewish people had to be developed, and that's when you get to the concept of the gas vans. And then later, not the gas vans will be taken to certain locations, but then you'll actually have stationary locations where Jewish people will be brought to, and they will be gassed there. And so that's when you had the development of the four camps in Chelmno, Treblinka, Belzec, and Sobibor, and Auschwitz was developed. Auschwitz was already there. And so that's the plan that was already in motion by the end of 1941. And the Conference of Wannsee in January 1942 in Germany was basically to consolidate that and to make it then expand the whole idea to incorporate all of Europe. So then they began to work out the dynamics of how they're going to bring Jewish people from the Netherlands, how they're going to bring the Jewish people from France, from Greece, okay, from all over. And most of those people will be transported to Auschwitz, and some to Sobibor, and a lot of the Jewish people that were in the area that was to be annexed, Polish area that was to be annexed, they were taken to Chelmno, and the majority of the Jewish people that were in the government general and that part of Poland that was particular Operation Reinhardt, they would be taken to the camps in Treblinka, Belzec, and Sobibor. Okay, and so that's where most of the Jewish people who were in Warsaw, for instance, and also in Lvov, that's where they were sent. So that's sort of somehow the overall picture. And the Jocz family had to somehow survive during all that. I mean, the plan was so insidious, okay, that there was just virtually no hope for any Jewish person to survive. The only way they could basically was to go and live in the forest. But then they had these, what they called the Jew hunts. They went out specifically to find Jewish people who were hiding in the forests. And then incentives were given to people who were hiding Jewish people. Incentives were given to surrender those Jewish people. So it was getting extremely difficult, if not impossible, for Jewish people to survive. So if you were a Gentile Christian, a Pole, or anybody else who wanted to save Jewish people, you were actually taking a huge, huge risk. But to Lada El, there were many people who did that, and most of those recognized as righteous amongst the Gentiles. There was one particular man in Lvov. Well, it says he was a member of the congregation, a member of the evangelical congregation. He decided to hide Vasily Jocz. After the Germans invaded the Soviet Union, Operation Barbarossa, ultimately Lvov was taken over by the Germans. They established a ghetto, and they began to, what they call the Aktion, they began to take Jewish people to Belzec or to murder them, work them to death in labor camps, etc. And so it was agreed that Vasily would be hidden in the woodshed from this Gentile Christian from the evangelical congregation. He was taking a huge risk. And Hannah, she said she could pass off as a Gentile, and so that's what she decided to do. She'd basically live under this disguise of being a Polish Gentile. And then the house they were in was accompanied by the army, so German soldiers came there, and so she was actually the servant, you might say, for these German soldiers until they were sent to the front line, and then civil servants came in, and the kitchen was her domain. And so this happened for a couple of years. So Anna was taking food, seemingly, to feed Vasily. He may have occasionally come out, but I don't think so, in this woodshed. So can you just imagine what it must have been like, the pressure, every time for instance, they heard of another Aktion or more Jewish people being rounded up and sent away to an unknown destination or just shot in the camp. Can you imagine the trauma, the daily trauma these people must have been under? I mean, I had to read through these accounts, and I just had to think, what would I be like if I was in that situation? I can't comprehend it. I just can't comprehend how they managed it. At one stage, in 1944, Vasily came back. He said that Anna must have taken him some food, I'd presume, and he said, I just need a break. And he said, the rats are getting into my hair, and the mice are jumping in my hair. So she said, well, just come back for a couple of days. It's almost over now, because by 1944, it seemed as if the war was about ready to begin, to end, and that the Germans would be thrown out. And so he did. He came back for a break, and she said, well, listen, I'll make you a cup of coffee, and then, or something like that, and then go back to the woodshed after that, because he had to go back because there were still Germans around. And so right at that stage, before he went back, some Gestapo officers came in, broke into the house and said, are you Vasily Jocz? He said, yes. And they validated he was Jewish by doing a body search. And so at this stage, Anna either just fainted and collapsed, or she was hit, possibly a combination of the both, and she went down, and Vasily was arrested and taken away. And the next day he was shot. And there were people who actually, two Polish ladies confirmed this was the case, because the husband of one of them actually worked in the prison. And so that was the situation. So close that survived for over 2 years. He had in that woodshed and under this tremendous pressure. And so also Paul and his wife Elizabeth, the other son, the younger son, Jan, seemingly had been sent away to a labor camp in Germany. Jerzy, George, who was another son, seemingly was in the Warsaw Ghetto during that period of time, and he survived, but didn't live that many years after the war. And of course, Jacob Jocz was back in London. And so here we have this this story, and it's so sad. It's so sad in many ways, but it's also redemptive in a sense. Anna survived, and Jacob survived, and Paul survived, and Jan survived, and for a few years Jerzy survived. But there were other relatives of the Jocz family who didn't. And what's so interesting, in 1945, Jacob Jocz just received his, I think it was his PhD from Edinburgh University. And the same year that news came through, that's when they finally got the news that his father had been murdered by the Gestapo. So you had almost like the bitter and the sweet in the Jocz family at the same time. And it's quite an achievement for a Polish Jewish man to go to Britain. So his English wouldn't have been that crash hot at the beginning anyway. And then getting a PhD in 1945. And that's I think that's quite an achievement. I haven't got a PhD, I haven't got my BA, but I've been told there's quite a bit of work goes into getting a PhD. And at the same time, his father, who worked with the same organization, had been murdered by the Nazis. So there's almost a bit of sweet situation in the one family. And I guess in a sense that's pretty representative. So if you look at the Jocz family and what they had to go through, you almost see there's a picture here of what the Hebrew Christians went through collectively in Poland. It was different in different countries, of course, but I would say the vast majority of the many thousands of Jewish people who are involved in the church in Poland, the vast majority would have perished, like the vast majority of the Jewish people, because all of those missionary societies that were serving there, they lost a large number of their Jewish workers as well. And so I guess in a sense, yes, it's representative. And as I said, there is something that is redemptive there. Anna survived. It's quite a story how she got out. It's just quite amazing. I wish I had the opportunity of interviewing some of these people, but that's not to be. We've got what we've got. Praise God, we've got the material we've got, and that German file wasn't thrown out. But after the war, of course, they went to Canada, and in that time when Jacob was trying to get the compensation, it wasn't an easy process by any means. But finally, word came through, and this was 1961. But he'd been working within a Tanel Institute, but then he was actually offered a position in the Wycliffe College, and it was part-time, I think, initially, and then they went full-time. So when he went full-time, he got a bigger house. So all this time, he's had the 4 children. For a while, Jan lived with them, and then, of course, his mother was living with them, and his mother wasn't getting any compensation apart from, I think, £28 a month from CMJ. So Jacob was having to take care of all that. But then they got a bigger house, and so there was a room for Anna with a balcony looking out over the garden. So just imagine, here was a lady who grew up in Vilna, okay, in a little shtetl close to Vilna, very poor circumstances, went through terrible, terrible situations during the First World War and now during the Second World War, and then being paralyzed in the waist down. And now she's got a room with a balcony with a beautiful view. And then shortly after, word came through that the Germans agreed to give her compensation. But within a few weeks, she became very ill, went to a nursing home, so she never enjoyed that room with the balcony and never really enjoyed the fruits of any compensation because she died towards the end of 1961. And so that's the story of Anna, in a sense. But boy, what a life, what a life. But she actually had the privilege of seeing some things come into fruition. She had the privilege of seeing her sons, Jacob and Paul, both being involved in sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ with Jesus the Messiah, with the Jewish people. She had the honor and the privilege of seeing Jacob not just get his PhD and go on and be what he was at Wycliffe, but he actually then became the president of the International Hebrew Christian Alliance, which is, I think it's today called the Hebrew Christian Messianic Jewish Alliance, or words similar to that. So this was the highest position for a Jewish follower of Jesus in that period of time, to be the president of the International Hebrew Christian Alliance. So she saw that. She was able to witness that. She was able to witness the rebirth of the Messianic movement. From the ashes of Europe, something beautiful was beginning to blossom in North America and later in Israel, which is today called the Messianic Jewish movement. She was able to witness that. And she was able to witness the rebirth of the state of Israel. Even though 6 million Jewish people had been murdered, the Nazis wanted to murder 11 million. Something came out of those ashes as well, the rebirth of the state of Israel. So Anna was able to survive and to see these fruits coming forth. But she died and in 1961, and what a testimony, what an incredible testimony. And that, in brief, is the story of the Jocz family. Again, there's so much material, and as I said before, David and myself aren't the only ones working on this, but it's been a great honor to be involved. Not an easy project. The Lord has allowed me to do some wonderful research projects on the role of the Australian soldiers in the Middle East, on the history of CMJ, the life of Michael Solomon Alexander. There's been some very, very nice projects. This one has been, I can't call it nice, not by any means. I've actually had so many meltdowns on this one that I've actually taken, last 6 months, I've actually hardly worked on it at all, because putting that book together last year was so intense. What else can you do when there's lockdown? There's no, we watched a bit of cricket, of course, but you can't do that all the time. Alex, I'm sorry. And but at the end of it, it's a testimony that really needs to be told. It's as difficult as it is to research and then to write it together. We need to do it. We need to give honor to those Jewish followers of Jesus who lost their lives in one way or another during the war, and for us as followers of Jesus to recognize that these people not just paid the price, but actually they gave us a testimony. And I think it's important not only for us in the church to know this. I do actually think it's important that the Jewish community collectively is made aware. Not that there were just a few converts, because sometimes it's sort of been said to be, but no, there's more than a few. You know, we don't know exactly how many, but there were many thousands of Jewish followers of Jesus who died not because of the faith in Jesus as the Messiah, but they died because they were classified as being Jewish. And I think that is a testimony also we need to somehow bring out to the Jewish community. So on that note, I'm going to say Shalom, Li'atot, Ad Machatayim, until a couple of days' time.
Wow, thank you, Kelvin. That was something else. That context just made you realize the depth and there was no length the Nazis didn't go to. How anybody actually could survive all of that has to be a miracle. It's and the danger that people place themselves in, actually taking in others, or it's just a huge story. And I'm not surprised you needed to go and watch some cricket from time to time throughout that. I thought that, well, yes, I think that Anna, she was beaten up really badly, wasn't she? And she was in a wheelchair for the rest of her life. But there is the most amazing touch of strengthening that happens to her, which if you saw the Holocaust Memorial Service, you might remember. But if not, or even if you did, we're going to show that on Saturday, next Saturday. And it's actually Yakov Jocz himself speaking. And to actually hear the man speaking himself, and it's got subtitles because his English has a slight accent, is really precious. And that clip is the only clip, isn't it, Kelvin, that Philip Jocz had hold of. He doesn't know of any other clip of his father speaking, which is a pity, because it would be great. I mean, there must be other talks. The whole talk was really good, but we took just a clip, and that I hope you'll see on Saturday. So just before we move on, because there is a wonderful Bible verse that came to me this morning, and it's from Isaiah 52 and verse 7. And it says, "How beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of him who brings good news, who proclaims peace, who brings glad tidings of good things, who proclaims salvation, who says to Zion, your God reigns." And God is still reigning. And the people, the Jewish believers, the church, all did their part to bring that good news to Zion, and still are. And I just thought there as well, Kelvin, that you had quite a lot of really good pictures there of the Jocz family. And I wonder if you could just see what they look like. If you just don't mind showing 2 or 3 quite quickly. Who's that?
That's the father of Anna. Okay, so he came to faith in Jesus as the Messiah, Yeshua as the Messiah, in the it's been late 1800s.
Yeah.
And he died when Yana was sort of youngish. So that's him. That's the family. So we've got on the front row on the left is Basili.
Yeah.
And Jacob with the dog collar is on the right, and Anna is in the middle. And behind, the older one there is Pavel or Paul, and the younger one is Jan or John.
Do we know what happened to John?
To Jan?
Do we know what happened to Jan?
Yes, he came back to England. He survived the war, went back to England, stayed with Jacob for a while, and then he married a lady called Doris Hawkins. I'm not quite sure if it's the same Doris Hawkins who was who was in the shipwreck. Okay, boat was torpedoed, who worked with CMJ in Jerusalem, but anyhow. And so then he went on to have his own pharmacy, I think, somewhere on the south coast.
Oh.
That is number 3, Samarov Street in Warsaw. That's the plans for the new CMJ headquarters in Warsaw. There we have a group of the staff in the CMJ headquarters. Okay, so on the front, let's see if I can get all my names right here. So on the front there is Emily Parkhurst. She was in charge of the girls' school. And then in the middle there on the front is Carpenter, Reverend Carpenter, who was the head of the work there up until 1935 or 36 when Martin Parsons took over. I won't embarrass myself because I don't want to get anything wrong. But in the back, on the right-hand side, the man looking straight at us, that is Victor Weissman. Victor was the all sorts man. He did everything at the CMJ headquarters, and he and his wife and little child perished probably in Treblinka. And then it's Basili there. And then to the left of him, the man with the big bushy beard, that's a guy, I think that's a Rabbi Weiss, who came to faith in Jesus. It was quite was a quite well-known man in Warsaw. And the 3 there that I don't know which one is which, so I won't embarrass myself and say what their names are.
It's just so awful that Basili, I mean, he got to the end of the war. He'd hidden all that time. He'd suffered the mice, the rats, and then he gets hauled out and shot. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. What a sadness. What's this place?
That's another shot again of the CMJ headquarters in Warsaw, number 3 Semerabov Street. So it was 3 stories. In actual fact, it's 4 stories basically, and that's inside. That's the Emmanuel Church inside. The whole center was called the Emmanuel Center, basically, because there was the schools in there that taught English as a second language, and the congregation there. And there's a whole range of things that were happening. Bible studies, you know it. There were services in Polish, services in English, all sorts of things were happening in that building. And that was bombed at the beginning of the war. That's the car that they got in. That may not be the first car they got, but that photograph is probably in the late 1930s. And they used to do they called them the missionary trips. Okay, they go all around the country, 3 or 4 of them at a time, and you would take the message of Jesus out to places all over the country. Where that car went to,
That's the Qashqai of the day, then, Kelvin.
That's the what?
The Qashqai of the day.
That is.
The car I've driven for 12 years, yeah.
Until they got the vehicle, they used to go out on the trains, and they'd go out for weeks on end sometimes. And quite incredible testimonies. And not only was it those guys from CMJ, all the different organisations were doing exactly the same. So it's quite amazing if you read through all the journals and the reports between all these different organisations, and it wasn't just CMJ. They went to all these different parts, all over wider Poland. Don't forget, Poland then was very big. It took in a lot of what is Ukraine and Belarus today. So they went to Jewish communities spread out all over that entire region. So a lot of Jewish people actually had access to the message of Jesus in the period up until 1939. This is Lvov. This is the center of Lvov. That is, I think, the Hebrew Christian Alliance, or members of, in Warsaw. So these are people involved not just in the congregation, the CMJ congregation. You would have also had people there that are involved in other ministries as well. I think that is the case. I probably should put my glasses on. But I think you actually have some people there from other congregations as well.
So most of those people would have perished, wouldn't they?
Yeah, the vast majority of those did perish. As far as I can ascertain, only one of the Jewish believers in Jesus in the CMJ staff survived. His name was John Ennis. All the others perished. This is Jacob in his office in the headquarters in Warsaw, because he was the pastor of the Hebrew Christian community there.
And of course, he survived because he accepted an invitation to speak at a conference in Britain, didn't he?
That is correct, because the CMS, the Church Missionary Society, invited him. Their speaker actually cancelled out, and so they quickly asked if they could actually have Jacob come over. So it wasn't scheduled, because Jane was already there, because Jacob had been in England earlier in the year. He then come back to Warsaw in Poland, did a missionary trip with some others, and visited his parents.
Oh, gosh.
Must have been August, or might have been early August, July, August. And then he went back to speak at the CMS conference. And he had his return ticket. He was ready to come back. And they said, sorry, sir, no more transport to the continent. So that's why he remained there. Now, this is a group. There's Martin Parsons there with the tie on the right-hand side, with the, looks like his cricket jacket. And his wife is 2 over, Emily, and then there are quite a few others that are there. As far as I can work out, from that group, apart from Martin and Emily Parsons and John Ennis, who's in the front row in the white shirt, as far as I can ascertain, everybody else in that photograph perished during the Holocaust. This is Victor Weissman and his wife and little boy. And I would say more than likely they must have perished in Treblinka. That's Anna Jocz, Basili. And there's Paul or Pavel and Elzbieta or Elizabeth. and she was originally Elizabeth Singer from Hamburg. Her father worked with Arnold Frank in what's known as the Jerusalem Church in Hamburg. So very committed. He was a very committed Jewish follower of Jesus, and her mother was a German Gentile. And so Elizabeth grew up in the work. And there's Anna, possibly in England, but more than likely, I'd say, in Canada in her wheelchair. And that's one of the grandchildren. I think Philip might have told me which of the children it was, but I can't tell you. If I say one of the daughters, I'll get told off because it's the wrong one. And so that's
wow, that's amazing, Kelvin. Thank you. I mean, the amount of research you've done is phenomenal, and I know you haven't finished yet, so with more to come. So it's absolutely stunning. Well, thank you, and I'll come back to you in a minute. I'm just going to digress now and advertise one or two things that are coming up. And this is the Basile and Anna Jocz book that Kelvin's written. That is a superb book. And as he told you about the 7 categories that he had realized amongst the Jewish people that he researched that could have been believers, maybe not. It's all in that book, and it's put out so clearly. And so I really do recommend you buy it. And it's just get it from our bookshop online, only £7. So we've got another meeting coming up. And that's another picture of Yaakov with all the pictures you've just seen, actually. So move past that and we look at the meeting for Wednesday. This Wednesday, lunchtime again, so you can bring your next sandwich and your next cup of coffee. And we're going to meet again to talk about France in more detail and some of the stories that were researched in France. And Kelvin will talk about what happened there, and there's much more to come, and I'm sure you'll be just as interested in listening to France as today. So that's 12 noon on Wednesday. And next we've got another meeting coming up the following Saturday. That's the 7th of August, and that's questions and answers. Now, this is a special meeting like we did for Susanna Kokkonen back in January after her tour. Some of these meetings are recorded, and so there is no opportunity for questions and answers. So I want you to write your question. I can think of lots of questions already from what I've heard today, and I guess you have too. Or you might want to make a comment. You may be a Jewish person who says, this is all nonsense and I don't go with any of it. Tell us. We want to hear it. We want an opportunity to engage. And ask your questions, make your comments, and send them all to me. And I know it's tiny print on there because it wasn't really thinking about giving you my email address at the time, but it's Jane M, JANEM @cmj.org.uk. First name, first letter of surname @cmj.org.uk. Send me your questions, send me your comments. And I will put them to Kelvin. And on Saturday next week, same time at noon, he will be dealing with these. We're also going to show you that clip of Yaakov Jocz actually speaking. And he's very engaging. I think he draws you in to want to listen to him. He's got some wonderful things to say, not least this little piece about his mother and the special touch that she got that strengthened her after her husband had been shot. So that's coming up. Next one. We always have to take a collection. No CMJ meeting, no church meeting could be really a meeting without a collection. And this time it's online. So you can take down those numbers, you can text a donation, or you can just ring up, or you can send a check or anything. But it's just really nice to keep us ticking over. We really appreciate it. And the next one, there are 2 meetings coming up a week on Wednesday on the 11th. So Paul Hocking is going to talk to us about that really exciting book, Leviticus. And he's going to be talking about the sanctifying the journey. And it's going to be really quite exciting. I think it's called A New and Living Way. So I think that'll be really worth listening to. And in the evening, we've got the usual prayer meeting. And this time, that Wednesday, it's going to be Scott Morgan of Shoresh Tours in Israel. And what is he doing at the moment? What has he been doing for the last 18 months? We might get to find out, and we'll be able to pray for the return of the tours to Israel. And the next one, why not take a staycation with CMJ UK? If your holiday is not yet cemented, if it's in doubt because you are going to go abroad, stay here with CMJ. And the 11th to the 19th of September, you can come with us, next picture, and you can go on a tour in Britain. Next picture, that's on the Mayflower. They're making a covenant together. These are some of the places we'll visit, and these are some of the people who are speaking to us. Not that Michael Solomon is actually speaking to us, but we will look at where he lived and things like this. And Steve Maltz will be speaking to us in the East End of London. But carry on. Next. And this is the tour. The leaflet is online. You can download it. The brochure tells you everything we're going to do, tells you the price. There's a booklet I wrote to go with it that talks about the Pilgrim Fathers. And what's the link with CMJ? Is there a link? Come and find out. Come on the tour, and it'll be very exciting. There's still room, and you can welcome to sign up. Just contact us. Next one. Thank you.
Booklet's free.
Sorry?
The booklet's free.
Oh, the booklet's free. Ah, yes, it is. So don't forget this booklet that Kelvin wrote, the book. This is a proper book. Basile and Anna Jocz. Next one, because it's so well worth having. And don't forget the meeting on the 4th of August. There is another meeting on the 5th of August on Thursday night. It's a recorded meeting. It's on the Poland story and his research. And it's based on St. Albans, St. Paul's Church in St. Albans. And you're welcome to join in with that if you want to, or you know someone that's missed hearing about the meeting today, then tell them to contact me or to contact CMJ for the details of that meeting. The next one. Is there a next? Yes, there's just that one. Do you have that Star of David, Joel? Yes. I'd forgotten that Anna came from Lithuania. So Anna and Basile came from Vilna in Lithuania, and that is in Vilna in Lithuania, in the Jewish quarter, in the museum there. And it's the Star of David, and God triumphed. His people triumphed, and we'll never forget that, and the miracles that God has made to happen since the time of the Holocaust is just something phenomenal, and never had happened in the earth before and never will happen in the earth again, because God is the God of this earth, the God of his people, Israel, and the church is grafted in. So please bring your questions for CMJ, and please email them to me, or your comments. Don't forget the collection. And I want to say a great big thank you to Kelvin today. I think the time in Australia, in Perth, is now, wait a minute, if it's 2 o'clock here, it's 9 o'clock, Kelvin? I think it's 9 o'clock in Perth. And is it 9 o'clock?
No, 22 minutes past 8. So I'm going to be watching a game of the 100 soon.
He's going to chill out with the cricket.
The new competition called the 100. And it's not bad, actually. It keeps me entertained.
Right. Okay. Well, we're going to pray for you and each other as we close. Don't forget to write your questions in. Don't forget to come to both the other meetings. Easy to do. Click on the link, sign up, get your free ticket, and all the reminders with the links will follow. So, let's just pray. Father God, we want to pray for Kelvin today. We thank you, Father, for blessing us with Kelvin's talk. I think he's just knocked his coffee off. But thank you for all that he's given to us. Thank you for the research he's done. And thank you for him being able to digest it and give it to us in a way that we can understand. Bless him and his family, Lord. Protect them. And bless those who have listened. And let them able to spread this message to others, to bring them in. And Lord, we just want to bless you now. In Jesus' name, amen. And I thank you all for coming today. Thank you for being with us this lunchtime. And I hope you enjoyed your sandwich. Goodbye.